Perfect. Awesome. Here we go. Letting all of our lovelies into the training today. I'm so excited.
I am too.
A few different little clicks here to get everybody in, but here we go. Here come all the lovely people. Here comes all the lovely people. So there's a Lori Myers guest. So Lori, I'm guessing you gave your link to somebody, which is fun. And unless they rename themselves, hi everybody. Hi Laura, hi Lori, and then whoever used Lori's link, you're in the training today as the second Lori Myers. And I know Lori Myers, there's one fabulous Lori Myers, and she's not replicable. So I'd love to know who else is here. If you want to change your name, that would be great. So I could talk with you. That would be super good.
It's Rhonda.
Rhonda, hey, nice to see you or hear you.
Lori sent me a link, so I used it. I didn't realize it was hers.
Sometimes it does that. It's not anybody's, it's ours. It's our link. But sometimes when we share links, it registers you as the name that logged in last. It's sort of funny how that's a Zoom thing, by the way. That's not us. That's a Zoom thing. But I'm glad you're here. Super glad. And if you want to, Rhonda, or anybody, if you guys are ever here live on Zoom, you can hover over your name, even if you're not on video, and there's 3 dots, and it'll give you an option to rename yourself. So that's
doing it now.
Okay, perfect. That's good, especially Rhonda or anybody. If you're typing questions in the chat so that I know who's asking the question and I can answer you directly, which is great. And that's just a little housekeeping, little tech tip. But welcome everybody. Welcome to Tuesday training. I'm so glad you guys are here. Everybody who's here right now has been here many times before, which just lights me up because that means that there must be some value here that I'm offering, which lights me up. It's not my ego that's happy about that. It's just that I'm super happy to be in communication with all of you as really expert practitioners. So thank you for being here again and again. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. Even if you're using someone else's link, still welcome. We love having new people because we get to spread the word. There's a lot of us doing really important work in the world, and there's more people that need us than those of us doing it. Hey, Rhonda. Nice to see you and hear you and your name. I love it. Yeah, there's more people who need us than those of us serving. So it's really important for me that we all band together and fill each other up and really support the work that we're doing out there in the world. So thank you for being here. And for those of you who are inviting other people and sharing this training with them and inviting them to come live or to watch on the replay, all of that's amazing. If you haven't met me before, my name is Gina Schatz. I am both movement and manual practitioner, a lifer, as they say. I've been officially at it 30 years now. I know you can't tell. I just got my hair done today, so I'm sure I don't look it, I hope anyway. That's my ego talking again. But along the way on my career path, I did develop the Schatz method, which is a method for both movement and manual practitioners to utilize while they're also navigating pain and dysfunction and restrictions in their clients. So it's been a life's journey and super fun, and I love sharing it with all of you. I'm not here to teach you the method necessarily on Training Tuesdays, but to teach you anything that would support you by way of anatomy, functional anatomy, even client work. And usually how it works is I'll chat for the first 20 or so minutes on an anatomy topic and then open it up for you guys to ask some questions. And again, any question that's on your mind works for me. I kind of like being hot seated. It keeps me on my toes. So, but more than that, I really like to support you. So whatever questions you have, if you want to formulate them now, that's fine. You can add them in the chat. You can come off mic, off mute and talk into your mic, and that works as well. One of the topics I want to talk about today, though, actually came up later in our discussion last week, and that was about joint movement and joint action and alignment. So I know there's a lot of yogis that are in our community and especially in our student lounge. And alignment is the thing that we talk about a lot when we're yogis and we're working on optimizing movement and optimizing function. Totally get it. Big supporter of that. Absolutely. And what I've learned from working with practitioners is that it's not so much that alignment is what's needed. I don't think that alignment is something that we memorize. I think alignment is something that we come to with our knowledge of anatomy and with our knowledge of functional anatomy. And so what I mean by that is, and if you're not a yogi, just hang with me. If you're not a yogi and you're a personal trainer, think about a position that you would offer a client in the gym. And if you're a Pilates teacher, think about a position you would offer someone on a reformer. And if you're not a movement practitioner, think about how your clients are moving. because the key is that the body is designed to move. And when we have musculoskeletal pain, it's from a dysfunction in movement. So we need to know how the body moves, even if we're manual practitioners, so that we can correct the movement or address what was going on incorrectly in the movement, not just sort of rub over it, if you will. And I mean that, sort of generally speaking. I know massage therapists do way more detailed work than that. Again, I am one, so I'm not throwing any of us under the bus. There's just some generalizations that a lot of us tend to sort of fall into when we stay strictly in our lane the way we learned in school. And so bringing it back to yoga, yogis tend to want to memorize, if you will, what a particular posture should look like. And it's true for, again, any movement. So let's say, for example, standing is what we talked about last week. For people not on their yoga mat, it's called standing. For people on the yoga mat, it's called Tadasana. So it's all good, right? Like, again, you don't have to be a yogi to have this conversation today. And so what we want to know is not memorize where the body parts need to be in any particular position, standing, yoga, training, etc. It's not as valuable to memorize what the pose should be as it is to know what the mechanics are, what the anatomy is that create the function in that pose. Because when we know the anatomy and we understand the function, any pose is okay, which is kind of what I'm saying here, right? Like, if we think we need to know yoga, then we're putting all of our attention on memorizing the yoga posture instead of knowing movement, which should translate whether you're a yogi, dancer, or construction worker. It's still movement. So what I want us to consider is, how well do you know the anatomy of movement? And can you use that to navigate whatever your clients are doing? So if you're a yoga teacher and your clients, your students and clients do yoga, they probably do something else too. So does that mean that if we only know yoga alignment, we can't help them in the rest of their life, right? We've limited ourselves there even as well. And if you're a manual practitioner and your treatment setting does not involve movement, your clients walked into your session, so they moved along the way. So we still get to know movement, whether we are a movement practitioner or not. And I would love us to understand the anatomy of movement so that we can support our clients in whatever they're up to as they move their body. So that's really the takeaway, okay? So last week we talked about standing and, whether the toes should be turned out in standing or not turned out in standing. And and I've heard lots of conversations sort of compelling me to think in alternative ways. And I love that. I love having my brain challenged on stuff like this. None of us knows it all, including me. I happen to know, I think a fair share, but I'm always open to learning, and we all get to be open to learning. We've literally chosen the body, which is our muse, which is an endless topic. So none of us is going to know it all. And so I always like to, when I'm reading through Facebook chats and messages and things like that, forums where people are weighing in, I like to really notice how open-minded are we as we're having these discussions with each other, rather than absoluting it and, making other people wrong so we can be right. Like, just notice where you are with that, right? Because the more open we are, the more information we can take in. And again, it's an endless topic. We get to take in more information, no matter how long we've been at it, 3 days, 30 years, or anything in between. So when it comes to standing, my rule of thumb on standing is that we get to offer the body a place of neutrality as it opposes gravity. Because in all movement, no matter what pose we're in, no matter what movement we're in, whether it's a static posture like standing or a dynamic action like moving, where there's movement in the body, we're always opposing gravity, right? Because we're perpendicular to the earth. So that's a given. None of us made that up. That's just how it is. So what we want to create for the body is a place of neutrality as it opposes gravity. Because when there's a place of neutrality as it opposes gravity, there's a lot less strain on the structure. And there's also a huge need for intrinsic strength, because intrinsic muscles, which we did talk about last week, that's how we got to the conversation on standing. Intrinsic muscles are posture and balance muscles, and they are engaged when you are opposing gravity, which means if we're standing, and if you're a yogi and it's Tadasana, that's cool. But if you're not talking yoga and you're talking general life, we're standing, we are opposing gravity, which means we must be including intrinsic muscles, and we need to put the joints in a neutral position because there's no movement happening in standing. And that's the key to functional anatomy. Function means movement, how it moves, how it works together. So if we're talking function, there's an implication of movement. And in standing, there is no movement. So we must find what's neutral then. And that's how I have come to toes are straight forward in standing. Because when we're standing and our toes are straight forward, there is no joint action in the hip. There's no joint action. It's neutral. It's a neutral extended hip. When we turn our toes out, that's lateral rotation. When we turn our toes from neutral in, that's medial rotation. When we stand with our feet far apart from each other, that's abduction. When we stand with our toes big toes lined up next to each other, that's adduction. Meaning in all of those orientations of where the feet are on the ground, it's actually an indication of the joint action happening at the hips. If there's joint action, there should be action. It's not neutral, it's action, meaning there is movement involved. So are there static positions where we have joint action? Of course, absolutely. And that's what I want us to talk about today. Of course, there's standing static positions where we're not walking across the room, totally. And I want us to make the distinction that when we're in a position, we have moved to get into that position. Now there's movement involved, now there's joint action involved. And when there's joint action involved, there's muscles involved. And when we're not moving into position, it's neutral. And that's how I come to standing is toes forward. So I hope that lands, because that's sort of like the foundation of alignment that I want us to draw from as we go forward. Is that, Lori, you're nodding, that's registering for you? Is that good? Yeah, Brenda, how about you? Is that landing for you? Perfect. Okay, great. So now we have a foundation. Perfect. Okay, so let's picture in our minds, if you will, that we've come from a standing position and now we're going to step back and create a lunge in our body. So we do that in yoga, we do that at the gym, we do that not so much at home. I can't think of a daily activity where we would do that, but doesn't mean there isn't one. I just not coming to mind at the moment. But let's all picture in our mind that we've come from a neutral standing position where there's no joint action or muscles involved in creating a joint action. We're intrinsically engaged to oppose gravity. And now we step one leg back into a lunge. Okay, when we did that, we created a joint action. At least one, because it's implied, because we moved. So does anybody know what the joint action is, by the way, in a lunge? What's the joint action in a lunge? Anybody here know? And there's a couple of people not on camera. It's okay.
The flexion of the front leg and extension of the hip, leg, and extension of the back hip, leg. Does that make sense?
It does, Lori, but you broke out at the beginning,
shoot.
so I didn't hear what you said. Go ahead, say it one more time. What's the joint action?
Okay. Flexion, well, it's flexion and extension. Flexion of the front leg, extension of the back.
Okay, function of the front hip and extension, or we call it hyperextension when the joint
Extension
is
of the back.
yeah, you're cutting up a little bit, but I think I'm hearing you say extension. And Rhonda, you put it in the chat too, so it's extension. It's not walking backwards, but yeah, when we just step back and we're holding a lunge, right? Where one leg is behind the other. Great. So when we're standing, it's important to come up with language that describes your joint actions. So in standing, I describe that as extension or neutral, which you heard me say. And then when we, for example, step back with our leg behind our axis, our midline, that's hyperextension of the hip, but also can be called extension of the hip. But I just want to make a distinction between standing as a neutral, where there's nothing going on in the hip, which is extension of the entire being, actually opposing gravity. And then when we step back, the back leg is underneath a hip that hyperextended or further extended, whatever the terminology is that works for you. But we want to just make it clear that that's now in a different position than it was when it was standing. Okay, great. So when we step back, And we've now created extension or hyperextension of that hip. And we don't extend legs because joint action happens at a joint. So joints are where two bones meet. So the legs don't do that. That would be the femur, it would break. So we want to be really clear on what we know about functional anatomy, and action happens at a joint. So stepping back into a lunge would mean hyperextension of that hip. Okay, great. So if we have hyperextension of that hip, now we've identified what the action is, what the joint action is, we've named it, identified it. And the next key is what muscle did that job. And no muscle works alone. No man is an island. No muscle is an island in the body. They're all wired to work in concert with each other. But what's the main muscle that created hyperextension of the hip where the leg has stepped backwards, where the foot stepped back? What's that joint action? Rhonda, it looks like you're feverishly typing it into the chat, which is exciting. I can't wait to see what you say. What's the main muscle that does hyperextension? Yay, glute max. Okay, awesome. So glute max is the main guy who sends the leg back, does hyperextension of the hip. He's supported by the hamstrings, which is our synergists. And then, of course, as we've talked about the lever system and reciprocal inhibition, there's also lengthening happening in hip flexors in the front of that hip. Different topic we talked about the other day. I think it's really important, though, to know all of that, right? Because if we're trying to figure out how did a client get into pain, or why do they have pain when they walk, or why do they have pain when they're done walking, we've got to know which muscles we're engaging to do the job and which muscles we're lengthening to allow the contraction to do the job. That's part of our responsibility as practitioners, is to understand muscles and movement. Whether you're a movement practitioner or a manual practitioner, you still got to know what created all of that. Okay, great. So we're back to our lunge. So we've stepped back now and we've created hyperextension of that hip, with glute max being the main mover to create that job. And now my question is, when we're in hyperextension of the hip in a lunge, is there any rotation going on? Is there any rotation going on when we're standing in a lunge? Is there any rotation going on? It's either yes or no. So ask yourself the question, come up with your answer. Rhonda's thinking. It's great. I'll give you a minute. Is there any rotation going on when we're standing in a lunge? Is there any rotation going on? Yes, a bit. Lateral rotation. Tell me about that, Rhonda. Where is there? Do you mind being hot seated, by the way? We're about to hot seat you. You ready? Come on, Rhonda. You got it? Come on. This is so good. Because there's other folks that are going to really learn from us. Okay, brave one. Okay, brave one. I love it.
I don't know many people who could step straight backwards. I am a body worker, not a movement therapist.
Okay.
40 years, by the way.
Oh, good, Carol. All right.
So most people do step out laterally and maybe a little to the side for balance purposes, because most people I see are not yogis.
Oh, okay, right. So you're saying when they step back, their feet go further apart from each other, they create abduction, or do they?
A little bit, yeah, as well as rotation and hyperextension.
Okay, so hyperextension of the hip, you're saying?
Yes.
And then which hip is creating lateral rotation? What do you saying?
Oh, okay. Okay, so the hip that's behind is causing lateral rotation, and the hip that's in front is causing medial rotation.
Okay, how is that?
Because not everybody's a yogi.
No, that's not it. Thank you for saying that, but that is not it. So here's the thing. I love that you brought this up, Rhonda. Here's the thing. Before we got complicated and started thinking about a person's body and whether they could do yoga or not do yoga, or whether or not, before we started adding in all those layers of concessions, is what I like to call it, we all said that standing is neutral. You guys all agreed. You're like, yep, standing is neutral. No joint action happening. Nothing. Okay, great. And then what happens when you step back? Hyperextension of the hip. That's it. So then the question is, then where did we create rotation?
In the torso.
So now that's not the hip, that's the torso.
Well, it's the whole unit. It starts at the
Okay.
hip.
Okay, so if the hips are not rotating, how would you know that? How would you, as the practitioner observing with visual assessment, how would you know that there's no rotation in the hips and then it's in the torso?
Shoulders and hip joints would align and make a rectangle.
Okay, and so then how would you know that the torso was rotated?
They would be, the shoulders and the hips would be misaligned.
Okay, so if someone's standing with rotation in their torso, they're standing in a lunge and they have rotation in their torso, and I get it, it's a little difficult because we're not both looking at the same person right now, so I get that. So just go slow with me so I can keep up with what you're picturing in your brain because I want to know it. If someone comes from standing and they just step a leg back and create hyperextension of that hip, where did the rotation happen? Why did the rotation happen? If all they did was hyperextend one hip, why did they have to add rotation?
Because they don't have enough flexibility in their hips.
So they don't have enough flexibility to do hyperextension?
Yes.
Great. So if they don't have enough flexibility to do hyperextension of the hip, where would they need to have rotation? Wouldn't their
Ankle?
lunge? What's that?
In their ankle?
No. This is where I'm coming from. My call, if you will, is that if someone's reduced in flexibility, range of motion, mobility, any one of those three, that prevents them from doing large hyperextension or full range hyperextension of their hip to do a lunge, that all that would be happening is that they'd have a squatter lunge. There wouldn't need to be any rotation anywhere.
Oh, a shorter lunge.
Yeah, where their feet are closer together. They didn't step back quite as far.
Okay.
But once they start adding a rotation anywhere in the ankle, in the hips, in the torso, in the shoulders, and any of the places that you mentioned for us to consider, my response to that is there's a joint action that's been added that isn't what we're doing.
Okay.
Because all we did was step back and activate glute max to do that joint action. One joint action, hyperextension of the hip on the back leg. Like we said when Lori was here, it's definitely still flexion of the hip and the front leg. And so when you start adding bilateral movements in the eminence, sometimes things can get askew, for sure. Before they get askew though, I want my invitation for us today and why I brought this up in such simple, like step one place, is because we get to be really clear from the simplest starting point, what is the action being generated in the body at the joint and what muscle does that, period. And let's just start there so that we can see if that's even happening. And if it is happening, great, lunge is successful. You could just work on whatever you're working on to make it more gorgeous. If that's not happening though, if hyperextension of the hip is not happening readily or without pain, then we get to focus on that joint's action and the muscles that do it and just stop there, because that means that something's awry in glute max, hamstrings, and hip flexors as their synergists. And that's where we get to focus. And then if we start seeing things like rotation, that's not even the movement we're up to. So now we've got a whole other new thing to contend with that we probably need to peel back from. But what happens, I think, a lot when we're talking, so we started talking about alignment with yogis. What happens a lot with yogis who are working on memorizing what a pose should look like. Hi, Sherry, welcome. When yogis are memorizing what a pose should look like, or a personal trainer or any movement practitioner, when we're memorizing what the pose should look like, instead of understanding the function that creates that movement, we can start making a whole lot of like swirling concessions and adjustments and miss the mark on the actual function that needs to be occurring to get that movement to happen safely and without pain. And if our goal here is to get people to be out of pain, we need to know how they're moving and we need to know what muscles do that job. So as we talk about a lunge, hyperextension is the action that's happening in the hip above the back leg. There's no rotation in that. There's no rotation even in the hip flexion in the front hip. It's like a different plane of movement, right? We're kind of like in this plane of movement rather than in a transverse plane of movement. Where did we start adding other planes and other movements? That's not the joint action that happens. So my reason for bringing that up again, I can kind of go on like, that's not it, that's not it, is we want to just go back to neutral, go back to standing when there's nothing. Neutral is standing. And then make the smallest focused movement, meaning one leg back. If you're doing a lunge, just focus on one at a time. Is that doing it? Yes or no? Yes, great. No, check it. Is the front leg doing what it needs to be doing, meaning the knee and the hip joint, because the movement happens at the joint, of course. Is that happening? No, make some adjustments. Yes, great, move on. Then you could do things like lift your arms up over your head and then make some adjustments. But if we start seeing someone in a lunge, like you said, Rhonda, and they're twisted, their shoulders are facing one direction, their hips are facing another, their back heel is rolled into the midline, so they've got some lateral rotation happening, maybe only in part lateral rotation in the hip and some other funky things going on in the knee where there's medial meniscus pressure and all kinds of crazy shit going on. Slow down, whether you're a yogi or not, take a breath. Go back to what is the joint action? From standing, it's one movement, step back. That's hyperextension of the hip. Bend the front knee, you create flexion in the front hip, and then stop there. Are those two joint actions happening, and are they happening with the muscles that are supposed to do that job? If the answer is yes to both, they will not be in any pain, and they won't be creating injuries either. If it's not, stop there. Rather than twisting and turning and trying to memorize what alignment should look like. Go to the joint action. It's so much richer. It's so much richer. It gets you really clear on the body's function. And again, that means that there's more bandwidth for us to support someone with, because we don't have to only be yogis to make this work or only personal trainers. It's everybody's hip does hyperextension. Everybody's hip does hyperextension. They might do it on the yoga mat. They might do it somewhere else. So that's my appeal to us to really get clear on applied functional anatomy, which is one of our favorite courses. We talk about all the movement principles that I've identified. There's 8 of them. I didn't make them up because it's the way the body is designed, but I identified these 8 design features. And if every time I followed the design features from step 1 to step 8, from, you know, movement principle number 1 to movement principle number 8, for example, then people were out of pain. It was really easy for me to support them. And I could also utilize those alignment principles to find out where the problem was. And those of us who are really working with more therapeutic and orthopedic and pain solution type work, we tend to really want to be working on the solution at the problem source. And my invitation for us is to remember the body's designed to move. If there's pain, it's somewhere in their function. Either something they're doing they shouldn't be doing, like a rotation when it's not asked for, or something they're not doing, and we get to test that, like a lever system, not being able to step back enough, for example, in the lunge. So that's what I think we all get to have. In fact, one of our Mastery practitioners, Mastery is a year-long training program that I have for practitioners who are looking to add the method to the work that they do. And one of the practitioners that I just met with this week said that that particular course, there's a lot of course, they do a lot of training, but that particular course was a real mile marker for that practitioner, because it was like, wow, yeah, I can walk through these steps and really apply them to what's happening. And she was a movement practitioner. A week ago, I spoke to a manual practitioner who said the same thing, interestingly enough. We were in 2 different conversations, and the manual practitioner said the same thing. You know, people come to me and they lay on my table and they're pointing to all the parts in their body that hurt, and then they lay down, there's no movement. But if I know the movement principles while they're laying, you know, in a relaxed position, supine or prone on my table, I can still address the muscles that I know do the movement, even though I'm doing the work and the client's not engaged in movement at that time. So I think it's really important for all of us, both movement and manual practitioners. And if you have not yet dived into those anatomy principles, like I said, we have a course on that. We also have a downloadable guide on the website that has the first 4 principles in it. You're welcome to grab that as well. And I would love to hear from you guys. How are you using movement and joint action? And if you aren't already, I hope that you will. And if you are already using joint action, whether you're movement or manual, I'd love to hear how you're doing that. How do you use joint actions with your clients and muscles that do that joint action? And how does that inform the work that you do? We could talk about it today. I'd love to hear from you guys, or you can also leave comments for me below the video. I know a lot of you email me directly, which I love. And I also love it when we're in community conversation too. So if you're willing to add the conversation, the comment in the section below the video so we can all weigh in, that would be lovely. And I know Lori's also asked me to remind us, we all also meet in the student lounge afterwards. So it's our private group that all of us have been vetted to be in. So it's a safe place to weigh in and ask questions. Never had any thread in that group where there was any type of hostility or, you know, there's lots of openness. Like I mentioned earlier, we're all very open when we're sharing ideas together. So please join us there as well. All right, so that's all I've got for you today. Anyway, I could go on for the rest of my days. I could talk endlessly about this, but I want to turn it over to you guys and answer any questions that you have. It can be on what we just talked about. It could also be on anything else. So if you are in the midst of some training and you have some questions about it, even if it's not ours, I'm happy to walk you through some of that. If you have questions on anatomy, if you're working with a client and you have some questions that I can support you with around what you're working on with your client, of course, I can't diagnose or give you treatment plans, but I can certainly lead you to a direction where it might inform you and something next to do. Any question, basically, they're all welcome here. So let's see, Rhonda says, can we please be sent a link for the downloadable guide of the 4 principles? Yeah, absolutely. So let me, the guide is available on our website, right in the middle, actually, gymnastshots.com. So there you go. You can click there. And it's right in the middle, about a third of the way down past, I think there's a picture, there might be a picture of me on the website, and then just past the picture, there's a couple options of resources that are available. And so you're welcome to grab the downloadable guide there. And if you still have trouble finding that, Rhonda, let me know and I'll happily send that to you. Again, that's the first 4 anatomy principles in that guide. And then in the course, in the Applied Functional Anatomy course, we go over all 8 of them. And there's also a masterclass. You can just dive into that course for about 90 minutes and get a flavor of it if that also appeals to you too. Any other questions? How can I support you guys today? Sherry, I don't think I've met you in person before. Are you manual or movement practitioner? Oh, we're typing today. Okay. Manual. Oh, no, Mike, that's okay. I'm glad you're here. So you're a manual practitioner. Awesome. I'm glad you found us. I have not met you before, but I love seeing you here. Do you have any questions that I can support you with today? Rhonda, any questions? Laura, any questions? Anybody who's here have any questions? I know you're typing, Sherry, so I'll give it a minute. I don't know your environment, Sherry, but I'm going to guess it looks like you're in either a physical therapy setting or a personal training setting. Am I right? It looks like there's some bands behind you. It's so interesting to look in backgrounds, right? Because you can't really get a full snapshot of what's going on, but it looks like you're at work and it looks like you're in a physical movement setting, in the office of that type of a setting.
Gina, so last week, the discussion about not releasing every tension and releasing the ball was very helpful. And I applied it with a couple of clients and got great results.
Great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Look at you, like take in information, be open, apply it right away, gain results, make the world better. I love it, Rhonda. Yeah. For those of you who weren't here in that conversation, I gave a little nudge to both manual and movement practitioners that manual practitioners like to release everything and movement practitioners like yogis like to stretch everything. And again, I'm both. So it's, you know, all's fair in love and body work. And none of that's true. Not everything needs to be stretched or released, especially when it's described as tightness, or even if we feel it, if you're doing palpation, not everything that's tight needs to be lengthened. So, and we talked about the different types of tightness last week. And Rhonda, I'm so glad to hear that you created benefit for your clients that way. So thank you for bringing that juicy question to us and then showing us what you could do with it. Okay, Sherry says, yeah, your personal trainer in a rec center. Okay, I got good visual assessment. I love it. Laura says, I'm good, and that made sense on the lunge. Awesome, Laura, perfect. Sherry says, I'm also a muscle activation therapist. We love MAT, good, love it. Laura says, I worked with my yoga class last night on shoulder movement, flexion, extension, internal rotation, external rotation, adduction, and abduction. Love that. Love it, Laura. And even just showing people how many different ways things move and creating a name with it, I feel gives them an empowerment rather than them feeling like their arms are just like one of those blow up guys at the auto dealership, you know, that gets, you know, the generated wind that blows through it. If we can identify joint action for our people, then they can actually be empowered. This is their vessel, right? And some of them don't even know what we know about it. Interesting, Laura, that you brought up internal and external rotation. I'm hypermobile. I know a lot of you guys hear that. I throw my hypermobility onto the table for the chopping block often. God bless you, Sherry. And I was in Pilates last week, and we were being asked to do also medial and lateral rotation of the shoulder. And I noticed that my shoulder didn't even budge. I was just doing supination and pronation of my forearm. And I was like, wow, look at me, not even utilizing the muscles. Like, no wonder I have little bird arms now, right? Because I can just do everything from the forearms and not actually move my shoulder. And here's the thing, guys, if we have pain, it's because something's not working or that we're using it incorrectly. And sometimes pain can be from not using it at all, right? Like atrophy is a form of tightness. It's like it's a pain point, right? I'm not saying my shoulders are atrophied. I'm not going to throw myself that far down under the bus. However, if I'm in a workout class or if I'm doing anything on my own, just moving my body, gardening even, but I don't create rotation in the shoulder and I'm doing all of that work from the forearm, that means my rotator cuff never gets stronger, because we only can strengthen a muscle if it's contracting. The action is contraction, and that's how you strengthen a muscle. You don't strengthen them by stretching. You strengthen them by contracting them. And so if rotator cuff does mostly rotation, medial and lateral rotation, that's its job. It also does stability, but I'm talking in phasic activity. If it does medial and lateral rotation and I'm on a Pilates reformer doing movement that never comes from my shoulder, but it looks like I'm doing the movement, I'm not. I'm doing a movement, but I'm not doing the movement. And if I'm not doing the movement, I'm not using the muscles that do that movement, which means those muscles aren't getting stronger. So for those of us who are movement practitioners, that's also really key in understanding joint action and the muscles that do the action, and then adding your visual assessment skills to make sure that's happening. And the faster the movement and the more dimension there is to a movement, the more it requires us to have really good visual assessment skills so we can see it, right? It's kind of like what I just said about the lunge. We can have someone step back into a lunge and take their arms over their head, and immediately there's like 16 things to look at. But we got to go right down to like the hub of the pose, the hub of the movement. And our rule of thumb here in the Schatz method is it's Sacrum-Centric. So that's why I would look at the joint action at the hip in a lunge before I'd ever look at the arms overhead in a lunge. Even if I saw rotation in the torso, I would go back to looking at what happened at the hips, because again, Sacrum-Centric. Otherwise you can really spin and look for a lot of different things and maybe not really get to the problem. See, the body will do anything you ask it to do by way of movement, even if it needs to compensate to do the movement and make it look like it, like mine on the reformer. It looked like I was doing rotation because the strap was moving, but I wasn't moving my shoulder even a little. Or it will recruit from other muscles if the muscles that are meant to do the job aren't strong enough or they're in some sort of lockdown, which happens with Golgi tendon organ responses. So as practitioners who are navigating people out of pain and preventing pain, we get to know what muscles do the job and what the joint action is, and then be able to assess whether that's actually happening. So as we're talking about, movement practices, and Sherry, even in your environment, when people are moving and they're moving fast and they're moving big and there's a lot of people moving at the same time, and maybe we're doing something with the arms and the legs simultaneously, we get to be really thoughtful about A, our cueing, and B, our visual assessment skills to be able to identify that they're doing what we're asking them to do, instead of a version of what we've asked them to do. The body will always move. It'll do anything you ask it to do, even if it needs to compensate or recruit, which then over time leads to injury. So when folks say, oh, I can't do yoga, it just kills my back every time, or my shoulders can't handle yoga. It's not the yoga. It's not the basketball either. It's not the gardening. It's how we're doing these movements. That's the thing. It's how we're doing them. And some people say, oh, it's just because it's repetitive. 100% repetitive strain is a real thing for sure. And I absolutely believe that there is less repetitive strain injury than what we throw labels at, because it's the core of the movement when done incorrectly that when it's repeated equals an injury. Way more than repeating something over and over again, creating an injury. Way more. I'm not saying repetitive injury doesn't exist. I'm saying that the hub of the movement is where we get to look. That's how we eradicate their pain and prevent them from creating it. There should be no rotation in a lunge, like we said earlier, right? And if we see it, the hub of the movement needs to be highlighted. Okay, look at you guys. Give me one little drop and I just go on. I told you I could go on and on and on. Are there any other questions? You guys have any other questions for me today that I can support you with? I love hearing that the questions work, that the material that we're talking about is fueling you up, that you make changes in the work that you do and create better results for your clients. That absolutely lights me up. That's why we're here every week. And we are here every week. We're here every week on Tuesdays, noon Eastern, and there's always a replay available. We stream live right into YouTube. I love it when you guys are here with me live so I can interact with you and make sure I get the question fully answered. Like Rhonda, when we were working last week, I wanted to really make sure I was getting your answer. So I love it when you guys are live with me. And that's a Zoom link. And then if you're not live, you can always watch it on the replay and ask your questions below as well. And I will always answer every question. Any other questions that we have while we're here together today live? Anybody here have a question? Sherry, are you typing a question for me? Or are you working? Just saying thank you. Okay, great. I knew you were, I didn't want to log us off too quickly if you were in the middle of a longer question. Okay, beautiful. My pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for participating and for giving us good material to work with. It helps me know how to serve you. I really do want to share topics with you that would really serve you. So any ideas or questions or topics that you want me to go over, as Rhonda mentioned, I'm all for whatever comes up for you guys. Just let me know what that is. I've always got great ideas, but there might be something specific you want. Let me know what that is. Drop me a love note, ask a question, leave it in the comment section below the video. And please share this with any of your colleagues that you know could also be served in this way, because we're all doing really important work and it matters to me that we do it and feel really purposeful. And the way we do that, by the way I think, feel purposeful is when we create results for folks, when our jobs become easier and the results become greater and our clients become happier. I don't know about you, that fills my cup. So anything we can do to make that happen. All right, my friends, it's so great to spend some time with you here on Tuesday. Thank you again for all of your contribution. I appreciate you. Thank you for liking the video and sharing it with your colleagues, and for all the great work that you do in the world, most of all. I'll see you guys next week. Bye for now.